Diamond King Lao Wu Li Chen'an traveled through Ningguo and became an abandoned son who was kicked out of his family. At the beginning, he was divorced, but he caught the eye of a nobleman with a song. He originally only wanted to open a small tavern in this world and live a simple life. However, by chance, he established a powerful commercial empire and entered the temple, becoming the focus of attention in the eyes of various forces. Faced with the precarious state of Ningguo and the deceitful struggles in the temple, Li Chen'an embarked on a different path. Husband, this road is a bit difficult. If it were water, there are always things that need to be done. And let's face the doubts of others like a lamp of ghostly fire, boldly walk my own night road. There will always be a day when we can. Everything will become better. Keywords of the novel. After being divorced, my identity as a poet immortal was exposed without a pop-up window. After being divorced, my identity as a poet immortal was exposed. Download the complete text. After being divorced, my identity as a poet immortal was exposed. Read the latest chapter. Chapter 1. Painting Pingtung. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Painting Pingtung on the third day of the third month in the 23rd year of the reign of Emperor Ning of China. Jiangnan Province. Guangling City. Spring is bright and beautiful, it is the perfect season for spring outings, and the shores of Huaping Lake are bustling with visitors. They were all handsome men and pretty women, mostly dressed as officials, dressed in high-quality long robes with shiny hair, and holding a folding fan in their hands. They gathered in groups of 3 or 5, each with a lively expression, shaking their heads and minds to comment on a recently circulated poem and song in Guangling City. They were passionate and had a hint of guidance for the country. But that little gaze betrayed them. Their little eyes always sneak a glance at a pretty girl without realizing it. Li Chen'an grinned and said, "Spring has arrived, and it's the season of restlessness among the animals." He ignored the literati and students and walked along the Huaping Lake, shuttling between handsome men and beautiful women, before unconsciously arriving at the east bank of Huaping Lake. There are few people here. Pure. There is also a pavilion called Yenyu. There is no one in the pavilion, so it's time to rest and rest. Sitting in the misty rain pavilion, Li Chen'an looked back at Huaping Lake and then let out a soft sigh. It seems that I really can't go back. Just the original owner's background. The original owner, also known as Li Chen'an, was the eldest son of Li Wenhan, the principal of Zhuxia Academy in Guangling City. This Li family is not considered wealthy in Guangling City, but it is also an extremely famous scholarly family. A scholarly family naturally has more rules, for example, the children of the family pursue knowledge first. Unfortunately, the original owner has no talent for it. He was able to memorize the 3-character classic from the age of 3 to the age of 9. After learning martial arts, I followed the Guangling boxer Zheng Haoyang for 3 years to practice martial arts, but still couldn't find his way. If he doesn't become a martial artist, he will give up and start doing business again. This is already the bottom line that his father can't lower. I bought a shop in Erjingu Alley of Guangling City and opened a food shop. After maintaining it for 3 years, it closed down and I still owe a lot of debt. His father, Li Wenhan, was so angry that his 7 orifices were filled with smoke. He used his life savings to repay his debt and couldn't bear the wind that his concubine blew in his ear. He kicked the original owner out of the house half a month ago. Immediately afterwards, a bloody incident occurred. The Shen family, a wealthy businessman from Guangling, came to withdraw their marriage. It was a child marriage, and perhaps the Shen family was betting that Li Chen'an could become the top scorer in high school. The reputation of the Li family in Guangling is extremely prominent in Ningguo, as legendary stories such as the 7 Scholars and the 3 Explorations of Flowers by father and son happen in the Li family. However, it is not the Li Wenhan lineage, but the Li family's eldest and second families. Of course, none of them currently live in Guangling City, but in Kyoto Yujing City. In the Shen family's view, even if it was queuing up, it would be the Li family's third room's turn for luck. However, they did not expect that the eldest son of these 3 rooms was such an incompetent person. He was really blind and almost stole a chicken without losing his rice. The Shen family would not easily agree to the divorce of the Li family now, so this matter caused a stir in Guanling City. The news that the Li family had become a fool naturally spread, and for a while, the previously unknown name Li Chen'an became a household name. Li Wenhan's face was swept and he summoned the original owner back for a good reprimand. 10 days ago, the original owner died of depression, and Li Chen'an came here. No one knows that the former Li Chen'an has died, and of course, no one knows that the current living Li Chen'an has changed. Li Chen'an did not pay much attention to the past grievances, because he was ultimately an outsider, and the events and people he had experienced had little to do with him. Well, although it's backward here, it's cleaner than in the past. Well, it's also a bit more leisurely. With this thought in mind, the mood that had been gloomy for over 10 days suddenly became clear, and thus, the picturesque lake of Ji added a touch of lively color to his eyes. Especially after a painting boat drifted onto the Huaping Lake. He looked at the 3-story painted boat with great interest. In front of the boat was a tall flagpole, with a bright red flag fluttering on it. On the flag, there were 2 big characters. Zhongli. Fluttering like dragons and phoenixes. This is a compound surname, and I vaguely remember that this surname holds a very high status in Ningguo. As for what kind of high method it was, the original owner was quite dull and introverted, and he didn't have a deep impression of it. This also has nothing to do with him, and even at this moment, the whole world has nothing to do with him. He feels like a spectator. For example, now he looks at the painted boat and feels that it is quite beautiful under the sunlight. The carved beams and painted rafters with cornices look very elegant and elegant. Unfortunately, all the windows hanging with the bamboo curtains of Xiang Fei were tightly closed. If the bamboo curtains could be half-rolled, there would be a beautiful girl playing the pipa inside the half-rolled bamboo curtains, which would be the most beautiful. Just as Li Chen'an was thinking so, footsteps could be heard outside the pavilion. He turned his head and saw 2 people walking towards this pavilion. The person in front is about 16 or 17 years old, not tall, with a rough appearance of 1.6 meters. However, he has a beautiful face and is wearing a snow-white cloud-patterned long shirt. He has a blue auspicious cloud-wide-edged ribbon tied around his waist, his hair tied up, and he is wearing a small silver crown adorned with jade. Behind him was a delicate young servant in green, holding a 3-layer food box in his hand. The master and servant stopped 3 steps away from the pavilion. The young man in front seemed to have never imagined that there would be someone in this remote misty rain pavilion. He looked up at Li Chen'an, frowned slightly, and quickly unfolded. The servant behind him was about to step forward, but he opened the folding fan with a swipe and shook it. With the other hand on his back, he stepped into the misty rain pavilion. He sat opposite Li Chen'an. At this moment, Li Chen'an's gaze turned back to the painted screen lake. After all, it was impolite to stare at a stranger all the time, especially since the stranger was too handsome. His lips were red and his teeth were white and his skin was white with a hint of redness, as if it could be broken by a blow. Plus those willow leaf-like eyebrows, the water-like big eyes under them, and the faint orchid-like fragrance smelled in his nostrils. He almost thought this was a girl disguised as a man. So just now Li Chen'an glanced at the young man a little more, and the second glance fell on his chest. 800 miles across the plain, he's a man. A handsome young man. It's just a bit feminine. The handsome man was looking at Li Chen'an at the moment. Apart from his slightly tall and burly figure, Li Chen'an's attire was extremely ordinary, just a blue cloth linen jacket with 2 patches. Also, the man was looking at Li Chen'an's profile. The profile is quite 3-dimensional, the nose is very straight, and the thick eyebrows, like swords, are very spirited. There are many energetic teenagers. The handsome man lost interest in Li Chen'an and looked up at Huaping Lake. The painted boat on the lake had suddenly turned its bow and changed its course, heading towards the pier in Huaping East. So Li Chen'an saw two huge banners hanging from the bow of the ship. On the right side, it reads, "There is dust in the eyes, but the world is narrow. The left side is empty." This should be a couplet, but the upper couplet seems a bit stingy, as if venting some dissatisfaction, but I don't know why it wasn't written down. Li Chen'an pondered for a moment and recited with great interest. "The world is narrow with dust in its eyes. A bed is wide with nothing in its chest." He casually released this couplet, which actually matched his current state of mind, but surprised the handsome young master. "Brother." The handsome young master spoke at this moment, and Li Chen'an turned around. He was once again amazed by that face, and his gaze naturally fell on the man's chest. It seemed to feel the weight of Li Chen'an's two gazes, and the handsome man's face suddenly turned red. He gave Li Chen'an a glare, and Li Chen'an smiled apologetically. "Ah, I'm sorry, the handsome young master is rare in the world. I'm Meng Lang." The handsome man did not expect Li Chen'an to apologize proactively. His gaze swept over Li Chen'an's face, and Li Chen'an's eyebrows were calm and his eyes were clear and straight. There was no hint of profanity, but rather a calm demeanor that did not match his age. He shook the folding fan in his hand again to conceal his embarrassment just now, but curiously asked, "Brother, this couplet is excellent. Did you just think about it?" Li Chen'an nodded and said with a smile, "It's just a feeling." Let the young master laugh. "This is not funny. This person's casual couplet is simply absolute. If this person presents this couplet to the people in Zhongli Mansion, he will definitely be able to win the first place in the couplet competition. If he can win the championship in poetry again, he can become the uncle of Zhongli Mansion. This is what many people dream of. Especially for those students who have come to participate in this year's academic competition. Brother, are you also here to participate in the scientific examination?" Li Chen'an shook his head. He has only been in this world for 10 days. How could he have the ability to participate in scientific examinations? He never thought about taking the imperial examination at all, because it was very tiring. He just wanted to earn a little money to live that leisurely little life. After all, he is an outsider, so why get too involved in the drama? Obviously, Li Chen'an's action surprised the handsome young master a bit. He looked at Li Chen'an again, pointed to the painted boat, and asked, "Brother, do you know that the third Miss of Zhongli Mansion is making friends through literature at Huaping Lake today? It is said that she is making friends through literature, but in the eyes of everyone in Guangling City, it is likely that Zhongli Mansion is recruiting her for marriage. This pair of couplets is the first threshold. If the lower couplets are well matched, you can be invited to the painting boat. With the lower couplets just now, you will definitely become a guest of honor. Miss Zhongli is the first talented woman in Guangling City, and she is as beautiful as a flower. Look at the talented scholars in Guangling City who are all attached to each other. Why are you sitting here alone so indifferent?" "Oh," the handsome young master revealed a sudden realization, "I know now. Young master has great talent and disdains to associate with others. It seems that young master is only 17 or 18 years old. This is like having 10,000 books in his belly and 1,000 bamboo mountains in his chest. Why aren't you willing to take the imperial examination just because you're a young master? Today, your majesty cherishes his talents, is he loyal to his majesty, and can serve the Daning Empire? Isn't this something that scholars should pursue?" Li Chen'an's lips curled up, feeling that this handsome young master was thinking too much and talking too much. He likes cleanliness, and now more and more people are pouring in here, so he decided to leave. So he stood up and said a sentence to the handsome young master. "Young master, you have taken a wrong look." He lifted his steps and walked outside the pavilion, then said, "Life is just like a feather in the wind, joy is sporadic, sorrow is also sporadic, let's all be jumping across the river. He stepped out of the pavilion. I am a wild grass and have no intention of competing for spring. The handsome young master's eyes lit up as he looked at Li Chen'an's back and said, Young master, what is your surname? There's no need to have met before. Li Chen'an waved his hand with his back to him, suddenly remembering that the other person's attire was clearly not from the end of the world. Goodbye. He walked into the surging sea of people. As if going against the current. It looks a bit lonely, and also a bit aloof. The handsome young master stared blankly at the disappearing figure and suddenly ordered the servant behind him, Ziyuan, order Yuheng to follow him. Your Highness. Should we investigate his details? Don't worry, let Li Jingxi investigate later. Remember not to let Yuheng disturb him. I'll obey you, maidservant. The palace maid named Ziyuan turned around and walked away. In the misty rain pavilion, Princess Ning Chu of the Ning Empire stood with her hands on her face facing Huaping Lake. Those beautiful eyes flowed, and a meaningful smile appeared on their face. It's not that he was amazed by the talents displayed by Li Chen'an, but this person is quite interesting. Would it be more interesting if he became the uncle of Zhongli's mansion? End of this chapter. Chapter 2. The Third Miss of Zhongli Mansion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. The Third Miss of Zhongli Mansion. Li Chen'an has no interest in this ancient man's selection of sun.in.law through literature. He felt that this matter was extremely unreliable. Perhaps he could choose a true talent, but if this talent had a terrible appearance. Just now, the handsome young man said that the third lady of Zhongli Mansion was as beautiful as a flower. Isn't this a flower planted in cow dung? Looking at that magnificent painted boat, it seems that Zhongli Mansion is also a rich or noble existence. Such a family, such a young lady, why use such a lucky gamble? Isn't it better to choose a good sun.in.law from the list after Chunwei finishes? Alternatively, selecting sons from wealthy families can also serve as a form of marriage alliance, which is more reliable than selecting a sun.in.law based on literature. He only thought this way. After all, this matter has nothing to do with him. His heart is like an ancient well without waves. In his previous life, he was already in his 30s and was deeply hurt by the word love, to the extent that he created huge wealth but still remained unmarried, becoming a shining diamond king. Looking back now, was the mentality at that time meant to retaliate against the woman she used to be, or to make up for the loneliness and emptiness in her heart? Or both? In short, in his previous life, he shuttled through the flowers for a long time, often staying away from home at night, and of course, the flowers around him changed one after another. He has seen too many flowers. Even Tai-made ones. Well, just like the handsome young master just now. Actually, after calming down now, I realized how absurd that was. What has become desolate is time, which has also made some girls who truly love him feel desolate. That world self should be dead, right? So who would be heartbroken at their own funeral? Maybe not a single one. With a silent smile, Li Chen'an shook his head and threw his past behind him. Having walked out of the surging sea of people, he had arrived at the south side of the Huaping Lake. Turning his head, Huaping East was filled with human heads. It seemed that the third miss of Zhongli Mansion really had great attraction. With so many young talents, who had the luck to become a guest on the painting boat. That painted boat has docked. Next should be the so-called Wenhui. Li Chen'an turned around and didn't look back again. He looked at the sun, 3 poles up, it's time to go back. Returning to the shop that had already closed down, he lived there. That was a food shop that used to sell some steamed cakes and grass cakes. Since he could only settle down here, he decided to reopen the shop. He is not good at cooking. There is a way to make steamed cake and grass cake in his mind, but it has already gone bankrupt and can't be made again after opening it again. Let's open a small tavern. I know the art of brewing, and I even went to a distillery to see it because of my good taste. There are still 2 taels of silver left in his pocket, which was entrusted to him by his former mother to his sister a few days ago. There were originally 4 liang, but I spent 2 liang in these 10 days. It was precisely because of this silver that he temporarily survived, so his impression of this mother was extremely profound. That is a kind woman, as well as a hardworking and frugal housewife, and a woman with a rather cowardly personality. As the main wife of the Li family, Li Wenhan was actually oppressed by the concubine. Li Wenhan probably despised the woman for being old and inexperienced, but it could also be because the son she gave birth to was not up to par. In the memory of the original owner, Li Wenhan did not have much good looks towards his mother. However, the son of that concubine inherited the Li family lineage, and this year at 14, he had already been admitted as a scholar last year, becoming the hope of Li Wenhan. In this era where mother and son are precious, the days of a mother without any background in the Li family are likely to become increasingly difficult. My mother's life is not easy, and my younger sister's life is also not easy. We need to run that shop and earn money to take over our mother and sister. With this thought in mind, Li Chen'an left Huaping Lake and walked into Calicchio Alley. Passing through Calicchio Alley, then turning around Bajiating, you will arrive at Urjingu Alley where he lives. Not far, it takes about half an hour to walk slowly like this. He didn't know that a woman carrying a sword was following him slightly behind him. She is Yuheng, one of the 4 great masters under the 4th princess. Yuheng frowned slightly as he looked at his back, revealing a hint of doubt. His back was originally slightly hooked, but as he walked forward, he gradually stood upright and finally straightened. Although the pace is still slow, it is firm, like a moving javelin. Just like suddenly transforming. What has transformed? Yuheng couldn't figure it out and didn't think about it anymore. Her task was to follow him and not disturb him. But she felt a bit strange. How could Princess Ning Chu, who was in charge of the highest spy agency in the Ning Empire, become interested in such an unknown man? Draw Pingtung. A guard isolated the area several tens of zhang away from the Yenyu Pavilion. The 3rd Miss of Zhongli Mansion, Zhongli, has left the painted boat and arrived at the Yenyu Pavilion under the protection of the guards. Of course, the painting boat is now extremely lively because in order to board the painting boat, one must match the lower part of the couplet. On the deck of the painted boat, there were 3 tables, and in front of them sat 3 elderly men with hale faces. They were knowledgeable scholars who were the judges of this cultural event. The lower couplets produced by the students on the shore will be signed and presented to these 3 judges. If they receive positive feedback from 2 of them, they will be invited to climb the 2nd floor of the painting boat. If you can receive praise from 3 judges at the same time, you can climb the 3 floors of this painting boat. If all 3 judges evaluate a certain lower-level couplet as grade A, that person can become a sitting guest in a 3-story building. Zhongli turned his head to look at the bustle there, pursed his lips and sat in front of 4th Princess Ning Chu. Her maid took a curtain and surrounded the smoke and rain pavilion, so what happened inside was no longer visible from outside. She reached out and opened the food box, took a delicate dim sum from it, and without scruple, she put the dim sum into her small mouth. Her cheeks suddenly bulged. It's still the best horseshoe cake from Kyoto Yunjinji. I said. Didn't your letter last month say you wanted to go to the northern desert in person? Why did you suddenly change your mind and come to Guangling City? Ning Chu seemed to be accustomed to Zhongli actions, and she also took a small bite of an almond cake. Father has changed his mind, probably. Probably the crown prince wants this credit, she said. She chewed on her lips, looking more ladylike than Zhongli, but unfortunately, she was the notorious spy leader of Ningguo, while Zhongli was a famous talented woman in Ningguo. There seems to be a reversal in eating habits. In September of last year, the people from the northern desert invaded the border. There was a general named Xiahou guarding the northern desert. The barbarians were no match for him, but unfortunately, they defeated the Nine Pass and even occupied the Nine city. Isn't Xiahou the servant of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince? Is this intentional, so that His Royal Highness can achieve military merit and suppress the second prince? Ning Chu took a small bite of the almond cake again, and her beautiful eyebrows raised. Who knows? If that's really the case. I'm afraid they're picking chestnuts from the fire. Wilderness is not scary. The northern desert has been peaceful for a long time, and the once desolate people were not scary, but now they are not necessarily anymore. How to say it? Ning Chu swallowed the almond cake in his mouth and said, "Now the leader of the barbarians is named Yuan Feng. This person rose up in the Shushan tribe 5 years ago. He spent 3 years unifying the northern desert and establishing the first truly meaningful city in the history of the barbarians in Xiushui Plain. That city is called Dahuang City. He conquered 16 tribes of different sizes in the northern desert and founded 20.7 states in the northern desert. In fact, he has already established a powerful country, but it's just that the temple is not aware of his very likely ambition in the future." Zhongli was taken aback and said, "Is it so powerful?" Ning Chu's lips curled up and he said, "I'm afraid it's even more powerful than many people think." "What does the emperor mean?" "Father, he probably wants to see the abilities of the crown prince's brother." Ning Chu's words were quite tactful. In fact, she had already advised her father, but obviously did not attract his attention. Or perhaps the emperor has other considerations. Who knows? I'm not here to talk to you about this, I just want to ask you, why do you want to do this mess of selecting a son.in.law based on literature? Zhongli pursed his lips and took a piece of osmanthus cake from his food box. He took a big bite and said, "Chen Guogong wants to propose to me for his son. You know, I used to treat him like a brother in Kyoto back then, but now he wants to sleep with me. My father doesn't want to offend Chen Guogong's mansion, what can I do?" After much thought, I had no idea. Later, it was the idea given to me by the eldest lady of the Shen family, Shen Xiaodai, to spread rumors to the talented scholars of Guangling before Duke Cheng arrived from Kyoto. Look, this effect is quite good. Zhongli, a talented woman from Ningguo, has no appearance of a talented woman at this moment. Her pretty face had a smug expression, and her cheeks were still bulging, more like a wild girl. Ning Chu didn't find it strange, because in private, Zhongli was already a mischievous and ancient spirit. What surprised her was the girl named Shen Xiaodai. Who is Shen Xiaodai? Oh, the daughter of Shen Qianshan, a grain merchant from Guangling. She's both talented and talented, but unfortunately her fate is not good either. What's a bad idea? It's not about blaming her father. Zhongli was indignant and said, "Her father has arranged a marriage for her, Wawakan. The other party is the Li family. The Li family, who is a 7-generation father-son with 3 explorations. Unfortunately, it is not the son of Li Wenho, the current Minister of Revenue, but the son of Li Wenhan, the head of the Zhuxia Academy in Guangling City. Isn't this quite good? After all, she comes from a scholarly family, so how could she be worthy of being the daughter of a merchant? You don't know, Li Wenhan's son's name is Li Chen'an. This guy not only doesn't have the scholarly aura of the Li family, but also, how to put it, although the people in Guangling City may say he's a fool, it's a bit excessive, but this person is really ordinary. I heard that he was even kicked out of the house and left in a dilapidated situation. That was indeed a mistake for Miss Shen." Ning Chu was not very interested in this matter and did not continue this topic. She suddenly leaned over and said mysteriously to Zhongli, "Just now, I did meet a young man who casually matched your couplet. I thought it was excellent. Do you want to listen to it? How does it look? He was born quite handsome, but the key is the temperament he exudes. How can we say that? At the age of 17 or 18, he has a mature aura of 70 or 80. Well, it can't be said that he is mature, it's a bit hard to see through. You can't see through either. Well, I didn't see through him either. Okay, this kind of talent is interesting, not like that kid from the Qing family, shallow. What's his couplet like? Listen carefully. Ning Chu cleared his throat and recited the couplet with utmost caution. The world is narrow with dust in its eyes, but the bed is wide with nothing in its chest. What do you think? Zhongli pondered for a moment and her eyes lit up. As a guest of honor, what about others? End of this chapter. Chapter 3. First Barrel of Gold. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 First Barrel of Gold. Perhaps it was because of the significant commotion caused by the Zhongli mansion today, and of course, it is also possible that the third miss from Zhongli mansion truly deserves her reputation. In the past, the Urjingu alley was quite lively, but today the streets and alleys are quite clean. Li Chen'an walked slowly to the east end of the alley. The sunlight disappeared from his head, and a thick banyan tree branch stretched out from the yard. This is his shop. In fact, if we calculate it, looking at the vast Guangling city, this Urjingu alley is not the most remote place. If we assign a level to this shop, it is roughly equivalent to a third-level port. Not good, not too bad either. It also has a significant advantage. There is an academy called Qian diagonally opposite this shop. It is smaller than Zhuxia Academy, but there are also hundreds of students. At this moment, there was no sound of reading from the Shallow Ink Academy, and I believe the students who came to the academy also went to Huaping Lake. Li Chen'an pushed open the door of this shop, stood inside and carefully looked. The wall was already mottled and needed to be repainted. The stove is a bit eye-catching and troublesome, and opening a small tavern doesn't require this thing. It needs to be dismantled. Turn the stove area into a bar, and build a row of wine cabinets at the back. The lanterns are a bit old and need to be replaced with new ones. The tables and chairs can be used, so just keep them. That's it, the key issue is brewing. Of course, brewing cannot be done here, it needs to be placed in the backyard. Stepping into the backyard, he stood in the courtyard and pondered for a moment before deciding to place the brewing utensils and storage area in the west wing. Although it was not large, the small tavern was already small enough to produce around 10 pounds of wine a day. Upon careful consideration, this Ningguo is roughly comparable to the Tang dynasty in its past life. During the Tang dynasty, the highest alcohol content of wine was only around 20 degrees, and ordinary wine was only around 5 degrees. The key is that the price was still very expensive. The price of wine in Guangling City is also very expensive. The cheapest wine is priced at 300 yuan per small bucket. A small bucket weighs approximately 4 pounds, and 1 pound is worth 80 yuan. And better wines, such as Guangling San in Guangling City, are priced at 1,000 yuan per do, or 250 yuan per jin. Compared to that, a bucket of rice costs only 50 yuan, so alcohol is considered a luxury item and not something that ordinary people can afford. And the wine brewed by distillation is bound to be more expensive, so the consideration is not sales volume, but special products targeted at specific groups of people. Of course, selling luxury goods in Urjingu Alley is not a very good idea, because the people living here are almost ordinary people who are not the target customers of small taverns. After careful consideration, Li Chen'an realized that if the wine is fragrant these days, he may not be afraid of deep alleys. After all, it is a unique thing. If possible, some marketing measures will be taken to attract the wealthy customers in Guangling City to come here. So the shop needs to be worthy of those people's identities, and the decoration needs to be more meticulous. For example, the appearance of a bar decorated in a past life should be low-key, mysterious, and meaningful. Don't ask why it's brewing again, because this thing is the easiest to achieve, and the key is to make huge profits. Of course, refining refined salt is also a huge profit, but that thing is controlled by the government. If you don't have enough strength to get salt, you will be hanging an old birthday star and don't want to live. Li Chen'an carefully planned and calculated, but discovered a problem. The 2 taels of silver in his pocket were not enough. Mainly for brewing utensils, store decoration, and grain procurement, it requires approximately 30 taels of silver. What's going on here? The finances of that family are now under the control of Li Wenhan's mistress, and it is obviously impossible to go back and ask for silver. Sitting in front of the stone table in the courtyard, Li Chen'an placed a pen, ink, paper, and inkstone. While grinding his ink, he sorted through his memory again, hoping to find some other ways to make money from it. Crouching on the roof and secretly observing him, Yuheng's face showed a hint of doubt. After pondering deeply, the young man wrote on the paper, one by one, without stopping. He wrote about 10 or so pages, and the worried expression on his face disappeared, replaced by a peaceful one. Li Chen'an did come up with some simple ways to make money. For example, with so many people in Huaping Lake today, I don't think the literary festival will end for a while. I could use my 2 taels of silver to buy some tea, water, and pastries and set up a stall in Huaping Lake to sell. Or go and order meals and deliver takeout for those talented people. Or, isn't that Miss San still asking the talented artists from the painting boat to write poetry? I have a lot of this thing in my mind, and I estimate it can sell for an excellent price. This is also the simplest way. So what he wrote on the paper were some poems, and he believed that these poems were enough to make his first bucket of gold. After drying the paper on the table and carrying it into his arms, he was about to get up and go to the picturesque lake to sell these poems when a person walked towards him. I have seen it. It is the attendant of the handsome young master in the Yenyu pavilion. When Ziyuan stepped into this backyard, she frowned slightly because it was too shabby. Young master, Ziyuan stood in front of Li Chen'an, a full head short, and she tilted her neck. What's up? My family, my young master, please go to Huaping Lake for a chat. Li Chen'an was taken aback for a moment, thinking that perhaps his couplet had been remembered by the handsome young master. He thought to himself, perhaps he had taken the couplet and boarded the painting boat. And then you have the qualification to write poetry again. It is estimated that the handsome young master cannot produce any good poetry. After all, generally speaking, appearance is inversely proportional to talent. That young master was born too flawless, so naturally he didn't have a few drops of ink in his chest. With this thought in mind, Li Chen'an suddenly had an idea. He simply sat down and looked at the beautiful green-clothed servant in front of him with a smile, saying, "I'm sorry, please tell your young master that I'm not available." Ziyuan was stunned for a moment, obviously not expecting the guy in front of her to refuse. You should know how many young people dream of being invited by Princess Daning, and how honored it is. If this guy is taken to heart by the 4th princess, with her favor in front of the emperor, with just one word from her, this destitute young master can immediately rise to prominence. But he said he didn't have time. By the way, he didn't know that it was the 4th Royal Highness Princess. Ziyuan persevered and said, "It seems that the young master has no busy schedule here. If the young master goes to Huaping Lake once, it will only delay the young master's time. It may be more beneficial to go there than to sit here." The meaning of this statement is already very clear, but Li Chen'an's thoughts are off target. He became increasingly convinced that the handsome young master needed to create a stunning poem for him himself. He took out a stack of paper from his pocket and casually placed it on the stone table. He smiled and said, "This is a poem, priced at 100 taels of silver. With this poem, your young master will definitely get what he wants." When Li Chen'an said these words, he kept looking at Ziyuan, and his heart was also a bit uneasy. After all, selling 100 taels of silver with just one song seemed a bit dark. Whether or not you are willing to spend such a large sum of money to buy a poem depends on the determination of that handsome young master. Given the wealth and status of the young master's attire, 100 taels of silver is not a big deal. If the young master falls in love with the 3rd miss of Zhongli mansion, then this transaction is highly likely to be completed. This is the supply-demand relationship. Now it seems that at least the handsome young master is not lacking in silver, because the attendant was not too shocked when he heard this price, just stunned for a moment. Ziyuan was indeed stunned for a moment. Firstly, what does His Highness want this word for? Secondly, buying a poem for 100 taels of silver. Is that considered expensive? Not expensive. But it depends on who made it. If it comes from the hands of the flower-manting flower old master in the Imperial Academy, it is hard to find 1,000 pieces of gold. If it comes from the hands of the 4 great talents of Yujing City, it is also worth 1,000 gold. But the person in front of me living in such a humble abode, unknown to the world, how could there be a literary abyss in one's chest? The Ning Empire attached great importance to literati, especially talented ones. If this person had some fame in Guanling, Li Jingxi could not have been unaware. Li Jingxi did not know that such a young man existed. So even if he has talent, he still thinks he has talent. Ziyuan gave a mocking smile and thought to herself, Your Highness has taken a glance at this person. It seems that she doesn't know how much weight she has. Arrogance. Her gaze fell on the piece of paper, originally only thinking about how to complete His Highness's task and let this ignorant young man go to Huaping Lake. He has gone, and His Highness can talk to him more. I think His Highness can see his face clearly and has no interest in him anymore. As the maid of the 4th princess, Ziyuan may not have much proficiency in poetry, but she also has a certain understanding under the influence of her ears and eyes. At this glance, she couldn't move her eyes. Her expression became serious, and the contempt in her eyes disappeared. She recited the word carefully twice and found it even more stunning. As for where the amazement lies, I can't say it, but I feel that reading it seems more profound than the poetry and artistic conception written by the 4 talented scholars of Kyoto and Yujing. Li Chen'an looked carefully at the change in Ziyuan's expression with a smile on his face, and his heart was already at ease. He knew that the silver would definitely not run away, it all depends on whether the attendant can negotiate. After all, it's a business deal. If he cuts the price in half, he'll also sell it. After all, he's short of silver, and this thing doesn't cost anything. Ziyuan looked up at Li Chen'an in confusion, her face still calm and composed, as if she had great confidence in this poem worth 100 taels of silver. Actually, he offered a lower price. However, he was originally unknown, so this price is also considered appropriate. After he becomes famous, according to Ziyuan's estimation, this word should be worth 1,000 gold coins. She thought to herself that His Highness's intention of inviting this young man to the Yenyu Pavilion was also to know how his poetry and prose were. The 3rd Miss of Zhongli Mansion's interest in this young man also lies in the couplet he wrote. As for the person, he lives here, and Miss Zhongli can come here to meet him at any time if she wants to. We met by chance. If one's eyes are aligned, let's talk about it later. If one's eyes are not aligned, this matter can be exposed without any trace. In this way, it will not have any impact on the reputation of Miss Zhongli's mansion. So she took out a purse from her pocket and a silver note with a face value of 100 taels. She placed the silver bill on the table, took the paper, and her gaze fell on Li Chen'an's hand. Li Chen'an is still holding the stack of paper in his hand. Young master, if you have time, why don't you come with me to Huaping Lake to meet my young master? With the silver in hand, Li Chen'an wouldn't go either. He waved his hand and said, Thank you very much for your kindness, young master. I really have a lot of things to do. Let's spend some time, about 20 days. If your young master has time, please invite him to my small tavern to have a cup of the good wine I personally brewed. My treat. Ziyuan looked around and even sniffed, but there was a faint musty smell in the air, not the aroma of alcohol. After all, I am a teenager. What kind of good wine can I brew? Can it be better than Guanling San in Guanling City? Not to mention Ruelu from Yujing City. Besides, as your highness, how could you come to such a dilapidated place? End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Good Words. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Good Words. Carrying 100 taels of silver in his pocket, Li Chen'an stayed in the backyard for half an hour. It's not about writing those poems again. In Li Chen'an's opinion, being able to sell that poem for 100 taels of silver was just because the handsome young master needed it. Such a business was rare, so he didn't think of selling a second poem. He is painting the utensils needed for brewing. These things need to be customized and require a lot of work, including blacksmiths, carpenters, bricklayers, and kiln makers. Some jobs require hiring people to do here, some artifacts can be purchased in the West Market, and some need to be crafted in the craftsman's shop. So no link can be careless. He even indicated the specifications and the requirements he wanted, hoping to get this done at once. He doesn't like trouble, the best thing is to get things done at once. After careful inspection, Li Chen'an was convinced that there was no omission, so he also carried these papers into his arms. It was almost noon, so it was time to go out for a meal and arrange all these things. He walked out with a step up, but still didn't lock the door because there was nothing worth thinking about at home so far. As I walked and thought about some things, I naturally thought of the cultural gathering at Huaping Lake. I don't know if the handsome young master won the literary title with the lyrics he bought with 100 taels of silver. He smiled dumbfounded, thinking that with so many people by the picturesque lake, he probably hadn't even finished the couplets by now. It might be evening before the final result. He estimated correctly that there are still many people painting Pingtung today. So Zhongli did not board the painting boat, and she still stayed with Ningguo in the misty rain pavilion surrounded by curtains. She just didn't go to retrieve the pastries from the food box at this moment, as if she had forgotten the deliciousness of Kyoto Yunjinji pastries. She widened her eyes and even held her breath, carefully looking at the poem on the paper in front of her. In terms of literary achievements, Zhongli is indeed much stronger than Ningguo. After all, there is specialization in martial arts, and Ningguo is even more obsessed with martial arts. After telling the conversation between Ziyuan and Li Chen'an to the second daughter, she presented the paper bought for 100 taels of silver to Ningguo. Ningguo and Zhongli were certainly quite surprised. One reason is that the person did not really have the intention to attend the cultural gathering, which indicates that he also did not have the intention to become the uncle of Zhongli Mansion. Previously, Zhongli believed that the person had a lot of self-awareness and knew that it was difficult to stand out among the students who were like crossing the river. It was better to give up than to put in a lot of effort. Even if the couplet gave the highest evaluation on the first level after being shown to the 3 scholars, she only had some curiosity about the young man. If he can come, it would be best. If he doesn't come, does the third miss of Zhongli Mansion still worry about choosing a good son-in-law to marry? Moreover, when it comes to poetry and prose, it is obvious that the difficulty of poetry and prose is even greater. Zhongli did not expect that the fourth princess would have stunning talent when encountering a man. But now it seems that it's not like that. She looked at the poem and seemed to see the person, feeling sad because of the imagery in the poem. This feeling has not been felt for a long time. He is really talented, and he is the kind of Gao Badu. But he has no interest in his ability to recruit a son-in-law in this article. This is a small blow to Miss Zhongli, who has always been arrogant. The second one is this poem worth 100 taels of silver. Such a good word actually uses silver to measure its value, which seems somewhat blasphemous to Miss Zhongli. Words are sacred. Good poetry and articles are even more fascinating and thought-provoking. How can this be linked to money? This is a great disrespect to poetry. This spendthrift. He sold it cheap. Miss Zhongli was very frustrated and said angrily, with this level of language, selling 10,000 gold can match it. Is this word really that good? Ningguo asked in surprise. Zhongli took a deep breath and nodded firmly, excellent. After thinking for a moment, I felt that these two words were not enough to describe this poem, so I added a sentence. With this last sentence alone, I can be listed in the top 50 of the collection of Ning poetry and Xia Yuan by Pian. Ning Chu was truly taken aback. 300 years after the founding of the state of Ning, emperors throughout history promoted cultural governance, resulting in countless literati and scholars. There are naturally many famous masters here, and the poems created by these masters have been jointly praised by students from all over the world. Then, a book titled 100 Poems of Ning Poetry Collection was compiled by the Imperial Academy. It contains 100 poems of the most essence in the past 300 years. Any one of them is an existence that is difficult to surpass. But now Zhongli Ruoshui says that this poem can be included in the top 50 of this masterpiece. Isn't that person also talented in everyone's work? The poem, Everlasting Longing for Each Other, Cherishing Plum Blossom, once written by Hua Manting, Hua Lauda, seems to be the 36th in this collection of poems. In this way, the young man's accomplishments in poetry, or at least the level of this poem is close to that of Hua Lauda. Also, the lingering charm of that last sentence is truly heartbreaking. No wonder she would say that this word is worth millions of dollars. However, this is also my judgment. Perhaps there are some subjective opinions, and we need to judge it more fairly. We need to invite Mr. Hua to gather 7 people to appreciate it together. But regardless of the final outcome, in my opinion, this word is the leader of today's literary society. Ning Chu nodded slightly, but a puzzled expression appeared on his face. You say. How much emotional trauma did he suffer to make such unforgettable words? Hey. How did I know? But he must be a person with a story, not as shallow as Chen'an. Such a person has already tasted the bitterness of the word love. If he truly gains his heart, he will cherish it even more, so this is not a bad thing. Zhongli Ruoshui turned his head to look at Ziyuan and asked, what is his name? Ziyuan was taken aback and said in an embarrassed low voice, is this my servant's? I never expected him to have such talent. I didn't ask. Where does he live? At the east end of Urjingu Alley, there is a big banyan tree that is easy to identify. Let's go meet him. Ning Chu was taken aback and said, is there anything so urgent? It's not easy to know where he's staying yet. I think you should handle the things here first. Do you still want to choose this sun.in.law? Zhongli Ruoshui shrugged her shoulders and took another piece of pastry and stuffed it into her mouth. Suddenly, she felt that Yun Jinji's pastry didn't taste much either. Her thoughts were still focused on this poem, and then it drifted onto the person. You still have to choose, after all, you can never marry that kid Qingzhe, it's just. Zhongli Ruoshui leaned over, his eyes shining brightly. Tell me what he looks like again. Ning Chu glanced at her and thought to herself that this little girl's thoughts had probably been hooked by that person. Seeing this poem, she didn't show much interest in the many young people outside. Appearance. Can't be said to be very handsome. At first glance, it doesn't seem to have much to do with the appearance of a literati. The figure is quite good, and his temperament is really stable. If he has some skills, it would be appropriate to come to the Li Jing company as a little spy. Don't be fooled by his ideas, Zhongli Ruoshui gave Ning Chu a glance. Your Li Jing is all a woman, and it's not appropriate for him to run away like an old man. Besides, literature doesn't judge appearance. Who says that a scholar must be elegant? Is Zhou Daru from the Imperial Academy so elegant? I said, ask someone from Li Jing company to investigate, or I can ask my family to investigate, as long as your background is innocent. Zhongli Ruoshui's face turned slightly red, and he took another piece of cake, with a hint of spring on his face. Being poor is nothing, I have plenty of silver. The house is a bit rudimentary and not a big deal. I'll pay to buy a big house. It doesn't matter if you were born a little lower, I'm just a wealthy family. She rolled her eyes and said, I don't think it's a big deal. We don't need it. Ning Chu was stunned. So what did you see in him? Without detachment, one cannot achieve enlightenment, without tranquility, one cannot achieve greatness. Do you remember the Prime Minister of Commerce who emerged during the Dade era? Ning Chu was immediately taken aback. Dade was the reign title of the 6th Emperor of Ningguo, dating back 100 years. The renowned Prime Minister of Shang was born in cloth clothing and originally devoted himself to the cultivation of Shangping. At that time, Princess Yuhua was traveling around the world and happened to meet Shang Buki, who had risen from the field while resting in Shangping. It is said that the sunset was just right on that day, and the young man Shang Buki, carrying a hoe, recited a poem towards the sunset. This is the poem Qin Pinglu, Chun Shi that currently stands at number 22 in the Ning Poetry Collection Yuan by Pian. Princess Yuhua was amazed by that poem and stayed behind to perform a wonderful scene of seeking a phoenix. Shang Buki had no fame, was silent, and was also very poor, but Princess Yuhua chose Shang Buki with her wise eyes. One reason was the poem, and the other reason was the famous quote from Shang Buki, "Without detachment, one cannot aspire, without tranquility, one cannot aspire far." At this moment, Zhongli surprisingly compared that person to Shang Buki. Ningguo has only produced one prime minister in clothes so far. Besides, Ning Chu also leaned over, with a sly smile on her face. She whispered, "Look, I'm also a princess." Zhongli whole body suddenly became bad. She glared at Ning Chu and said, "But Princess Yuhua is full of poetry and books, and the two of them got married. It's called Chinsa harmony, you." She raised her eyebrows and eyes, completely disregarding the identity of Princess Ning Chu. "You're good at wielding knives and swords, but that young man can't accompany you wandering the world, so I'm better suited," she said. Ning Chu suddenly laughed. "I'm teasing you, do you really think you can pick up a commercial artifact?" "Hee, it's not certain. But his business is not just about poetry, he knows a lot." "And that young man?" At this moment, Ziyuan suddenly remembered the last sentence Li Chen'an said to him, and she quickly whispered. "Your Highness, when the servant was about to leave, he said something. He said, 'Please go to his small courtyard in 20 days. He invited His Highness to have a glass of wine he brewed. It seems that he knows how to make wine." "Wine?" "Well, that's what he said. Also, Your Highness, he seems to have a lot of such words in his hand." Ning Chu and Zhongli were suddenly startled and asked in unison, "Really?" Ziyuan swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and she didn't expect that the silent and nameless boy could be worth thousands of dollars with just one word. "If I had known earlier, I would have bought it all for him. Anyway, at that time he was holding a stack of paper in his hand, and I guess it should be real. By the way, Yuheng definitely knows. Go call Yuheng back. Also, ask Kaiyang to investigate his background quickly." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Brother has silver. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Brother has silver. When Ziyuan found Yuheng again, it was already the end of time. She went to the shop under the big banyan tree in Urjingu Alley, but found it empty. Then she followed the mark left by Yuheng all the way to a porcelain shop in the West Market. Yuheng followed Ziyuan to Huaping Lake and even looked into the shop before leaving. Li Chen'an certainly didn't know that there was always a little tale behind him. At this moment, he was explaining to the shopkeeper of this shop what was painted on this piece of paper. The difficulty is not high, but the shape of the tool is slightly strange. Both sides quickly reached an agreement, and by the way, he also bought a few jars and ordered a batch of small and exquisite jars. After paying a deposit and agreeing on the time and location of the transaction, Li Chen'an left the porcelain shop and continued to search for what he needed in the West Market. Shishir is an extremely bustling market in Guangling City, where you can buy oil, salt, firewood, rice, soy sauce, vinegar, and tea. Of course, there are also iron, porcelain, wood, and so on here. Li Chen'an walked around and occasionally went to a shop to pick up a small object with great interest. Then he walked slowly, looking at the dazzling array of goods and the constant flow of people. He suddenly felt that this feeling was quite good. This was an experience he had never experienced before, thinking that this was the down-to-earth fireworks of the human world. After achieving success in their previous life, they lived a life in the cloud, which many people envied, but they did not know the ups and downs behind that life. In order to engage in business intrigues and deceit, I wish I could kill my opponent immediately, and when interacting with the government, I flatter and flatter like a grandson, bowing and being lowly. The nerve in my mind is always tense, afraid that something might go wrong and cause me to fall off that cloud. Insomnia, restlessness, and even depression are all visible torments that others cannot see, and what they see is the surface beauty. It's good now. Although the small courtyard is simple, it sleeps peacefully. Now there is no longer any restlessness, and everything can come slowly. Well, after the small tavern opens, there is no need to be too eager for survival. Being able to make a small profit is enough. Money is a thing that Li Chen'an now truly understands as an external object. It is indispensable, but there is no need to pursue it with too much effort. It's enough to cover the normal expenses of a family, but of course, it would be best if there were still a few surplus throughout the year. This is not difficult for him. Li Chen'an thought this way and passed by a wooden shop, where he bought 2 more beds and added a few mattresses and quilts to the next grocery store. These things were given to the money shop for delivery, and the service was quite good. As he walked out of the shop and continued forward, a voice suddenly came from behind. "Brother, brother." Turning her head, it was her younger sister Li Xiaoxi. Li Xiaoxi is 14 years old, just like her name. She is quite petite, but her eyebrows and eyes have not yet grown, her hair is slightly withered and yellow, and her face appears a bit childish. But her thoughts were very meticulous. When she was still at that house in the past, her sister never despised this brother's foolishness, but instead continued to encourage him. "It's really you. I went to that shop, but you weren't there." Li Chen'an looked at the small bag twisted in Li Xiaoxi's hand and smiled. "Why come to the West Market for a stroll? My mother is sick. A few days ago, I invited a doctor to take a pair of medicine, but after drinking 3 doses, I still haven't improved. I originally wanted to go and invite Dr. Zhang from the revival hall again." Li Xiaoxi pursed her lips, revealing 2 shallow pear puddles on her cheeks. She lowered her head, gritted her teeth, and her cheeks bulged with resentment, saying, "That woman doesn't give silver. That woman is of course the concubine." If it were mentioned, Li Chen'an and his siblings should have called her Ernyang, but obviously neither of them had a good impression of that Ernyang. But now that her mother is sick and needs medical treatment, she actually doesn't give her money. This made Li Chen'an frown. "Let's go and invite Dr. Zhang from the Spring Festival Hall." Li Xiaoxi didn't leave. Because the diagnosis fee at Huachuntang is very expensive. She has no silver in her pocket. And in her brother's pocket, it was obviously cleaner than her face. She took a deep breath and lifted the small bag in her hand. "I used that prescription to grab a pair of medicine, and I'll go back and fry it for my mother to take and see." Li Xiaoxi went to Urjingu Alley to find Li Chen'an, without even thinking that this brother had money to hire a doctor. In Li Xiaoxi's opinion, the 4 taels of silver given to him 10 days ago may have already been spent. She just hopes that her brother can go back and see her mother. But what Li Chen'an said to her at this moment made her look up in shock. "Go to the Spring Festival Hall, brother has silver." Looking into Li Xiaoxi's incredulous eyes, Li Chen'an took out the remaining 3 10 taels of silver bills and about 5 taels of broken silver from his arms. Li Xiaoxi opened her mouth wide and suddenly nervously looked left and right. She tugged at Li Chen'an's clothes and whispered, "Brother, did you go gambling again?" This predecessor had been in business for 3 years and owed a lot of debt, precisely because he went to the gambling house. At first, he didn't go by himself, but was taken by a young thug named Sun Air in Urjingu Alley. I won a small sum of silver for the first time. The second big win was 5 taels of silver. Then he fired uncontrollably, and then lost a devastating blow. If it weren't for the land deed of that shop being in his mother's hands, Li Chen'an would have tragically discovered that he had traveled through time without even a place to stay. So at this moment, Li Chen'an suddenly took out so much silver, which really scared Li Qiaoshi. "Brother, you swore to your mother. You. Her face was very anxious, and she stomped her feet with a look of hatred that could not turn iron into steel. "Why are you so disrespectful? This is going to anger my mother to death." A warm feeling suddenly rose in Li Chen'an's heart. He not only didn't get angry because his sister didn't ask for the blame, but also showed a smile. How long has it been since anyone cared about themselves like this? He rubbed Li Qiaoshi's head and said, "Brother didn't go gambling. Where did you get so much silver? Brother earned it seriously. Let's go to the revival hall. Don't delay treating your mother's illness." Li Qiaoshi looked at Li Chen'an with suspicion, not noticing anything unusual on his face, but she felt a slight abnormality in her heart. My older brother was naturally cowardly, timid, and not good at speaking. That cowardice was even etched on his face. He was usually timid and walked with his head hooked, as if afraid that someone would recognize him, and even more afraid that someone would know that he was the useless eldest son of the Li family, who was neither civil nor martial. But now there was a faint smile on his face, which revealed a calming expression that made Li Qiaoshi feel at ease. So she temporarily put aside those doubts and felt that it was more important to treat her mother's illness first. The siblings left West Market and headed towards the Spring Festival Hall located in Changle Lane. Painting Pingtung, Smoke and Rain Pavilion. After Yuheng recounted in detail what she had seen to Ning Chuchu and Zhongli, the two women looked at each other in disbelief. "I thought he had spent a lot of time composing this poem, after all, it's not easy to do it." Zhongli sat up straight, sighed leisurely, and then said, "Such a good poem, he actually finished it with a pen. So it seems that the stack of paper in his hand is about 10 poems. Regardless of the rest, just this stroke of writing exudes a divine and effortless aura, which cannot be compared to those who claim to be talented. What kind of erudition, what kind of accomplishment? No, I have to go and see this person." Zhongli stood up and said, "Go now." Ning Chuchu was also shocked by the young man's talent, but she was more rational than Zhongli. She pressed Zhongli shoulder and said, "Don't be so impatient. Didn't I ask Kaiyang to investigate? The initial test here is almost over, you have to go to the painting boat to host the upcoming poetry competition. As for him, wait until Kaiyang investigates his background before we can discuss it. After all, it doesn't make sense for such a talented person to be hidden in the market. I suspect he came from somewhere else, and if there were any problems with his character. From this poem, it seems that he has been deeply hurt by emotions. If he already has a family elsewhere, even if he is talented, he wouldn't be your good match." Ning Chuchu's words made Zhongli calm down. Although Guangling City is large, it doesn't make much sense for such a sudden appearance of a talented person who can amaze the world. There are some similarities between literature and martial arts in some aspects. Literature requires diligent study, while martial arts requires hard practice. Both are skills that are polished by water. Even the most talented geniuses need to accumulate knowledge and then develop thin skills. Of course, it was Ning Chuchu's last words that truly blocked her. Of course, the third miss of Zhongli's family cannot treat someone as a child, even if they hold a first-class official position. Isn't Ziyuan saying he wants to open a small tavern in Urjingu Alley? There is plenty of time to thoroughly investigate all 18 generations of his ancestors, so that we can proceed more confidently when the time comes. So Zhongli sat down again and suddenly showed a brilliant smile. "Do you think If his family background is pure and he hasn't been married yet. Should I also take the initiative? Ning Chuchu's beautiful eyebrows raised and he raised the bar, but he was the one I met first. Your Majesty is a Royal Highness Princess, and your future husband must come from a certain government. You can also look up to these people. I can't say for sure, after all, I also hope my future husband will be like the Prime Minister of Commerce. Zhongli glared at Ning Chuchu without taking her words to heart, because Ning Chuchu was a princess and her future was even more difficult to control on her own. Just then, a maid hurriedly walked in. She gave a blessing to the second person and said to Zhongli, Miss, in the couplet stage, Master Zhou and his team have selected 100 young men aged between 16 and 20. Among them, there are 20.6 people climbing the third floor. The Xin Xiaodai, the girl you invited, has also arrived and is waiting in the back cabin of the third floor. Zhongli nodded and said to Ning Chuchu, let's go and meet those talented people. The two of them stood up, and Zhongli said with some regret, unfortunately, he didn't come, so he always felt like something was missing. Let's just consider it a literary gathering on March 3rd. As for choosing a son.in.law. If Duke Qing arrives, you must help me stop it. Stepping out of this misty rain pavilion, it was already sunset. Looking at the picturesque lake dyed red by the sunset, Zhongli thought to himself, if he were here, could he write a poem about the sunset that could rival the famous Shangbuki? End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Fierce Li Chen'an. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Fierce Li Chen'an, who was missed by Zhongli, has now arrived at the Li mansion with his sister and Dr. Zhang from the revival hall. The memories here are certainly profound, but when Li Chen'an sorted out those troublemakers, these memories were deliberately sealed off by him. In my memory, I have no attachment to this place, but rather a deep-seated resistance, mostly extremely negative emotions. There is no happy childhood or happy youth here. The father named Li Wenhan, in order to honor the third wife of the Li family, forced his son, who was not originally a student, to become a depression patient. He is too utilitarian. The Dufang and Erfang produced many talented individuals, especially the renowned 7 scholars in Ningguo, father and son 3 explorers. The 7 scholars of the Li family came from the main family, while the father and son 3 explorers came from the second family. Tanhua is definitely a jinshi, so there are a total of 10 jinshi in these 2 rooms. The most respected official today is Li Wenho, the second wife of the Li family. He was 40 years old and had already become the Minister of Revenue. According to reason, these 2 houses had already prospered and should have brought the third house together for common prosperity. In my memory, they did have some support, but the stubborn Li Wenhan refused. He firmly believed that he could personally teach one or even a few successful candidates, but the ancestral tomb of the Li family seemed to be more inclined towards those 2 families. Li Wenhan himself was only a juren, and he failed the imperial examination for decades. The juren could have been appointed as an official, and those 2 houses had already made a statement about this matter, but Li Wenhan did not receive this favor. He still stayed in Guangling City, but he went from being a master at Zhuxia Academy to becoming the current head of the academy. He swore to teach and educate, but in fact, all he wanted was to cultivate his son into a talent if he didn't succeed. However, his eldest son Li Chen'an gave him a hard blow, causing him to become estranged from his first wife, who was Li Chen'an's mother Ding Xiaoyi. At the same time, there seems to have been a rift between these 3 rooms and the other 2 rooms, and there has been no further communication for more than 10 years now. So this is also one of the reasons why Xin Qianshan, a grain merchant from Guangling, dared to come and withdraw his marriage after hearing about these things. If the 3 houses were harmonious, even if Li Chen'an lived a mediocre life, Xin Qianshan would definitely marry his daughter Xin Xiaodai to Li Chen'an, just because Li Chen'an's second uncle was the Minister of Revenue. These thoughts flashed through Li Chen'an's mind, his lips curled up and he smiled. As my younger sister stepped into the door of the Li mansion, walked past the front garden, and was about to step on the moonlit door to the east courtyard, a voice suddenly came. "Oh, isn't that De Lang? Your father has kicked you out of the house. What kind of wind has brought you back?" Li Chen'an turned his head and saw a seductive woman walking towards him with a red silk in her hand and a puzzled face. His eyes were full of vigilance, and his face naturally looked bad. "This is the little concubine named Jiang Hui." Li Chen'an raised his eyebrows and casually uttered two words. "East wind." Jiang Hui was stunned for a moment, because in the past, the eldest son of the Li family would never dare to talk back to him. He would always bow down in front of him, even if he scolded him like a dog, he would always suffer. But today he not only looked up at himself, but also had a malicious smile on his face. The key was that he dared to tease himself. Her face darkened and she said, "What's wrong? You've developed a temper by hanging out these days." Li Xiaoxi was very worried that her brother would suffer another loss. She tugged at her brother's sleeve, looked at Dr. Zhang, who was standing awkwardly on the side, and gave Li Chen'an a wink, meaning that it was important for her brother to endure and treat his mother first. Li Chen'an ignored Jiang Hui's words, withdrew his gaze, and walked over to the moonlit door. "Stop me." Jiang Hui scolded and crossed her hands at her waist, "You're not from this mansion now. If you dare to go in, be careful not to let someone break your dog leg." Li Chen'an frowned and withdrew the foot he had stepped on, but did not go to see Jiang Hui. Instead, he whispered to his sister, "Take Dr. Zhang to treat your mother first." "Brother." Li Xiaoxi looked up at Li Chen'an with extremely worried eyes, but what she saw was still the calm and composed smile on her brother's face. "Listen to me, I'll come in soon." With these words, Li Chen'an rubbed Li Xiaoxi's head again and said, "Go in, be good. Brother will be fine. This is the second time my brother has rubbed his head today." Li Xiaoxi felt very strange in her heart because her older brother had never shown such affection before. She pondered for a moment and said, "A hero doesn't take immediate losses, be careful." Then she led Dr. Zhang into the moonlit door. Jiang Hui showed a smug expression and said, "Why, there's still money to treat that damn woman. I'll leave your words behind. Your father spent 100 taels of silver to accompany you in that trouble. After that, you can't expect to get another penny from me. Something that's not promising. Why don't you get out of here? Do you want me to beat you out with a stick?" Before Jiang Hui could finish speaking, suddenly, Li Chen'an took an arrow step in front of her. She was startled and took a step back, but Li Chen'an's speed was faster. With a crisp bang, Li Chen'an slapped her in the face. This slap was extremely powerful. Jiang Hui's head was tilted and a mouthful of blood spurted out of her mouth. "You." Just as the word "you" was spoken, there was a loud bang and Li Chen'an slapped her on the other side of her face. "What are you?" Li Chen'an bullied his body with a step, lifted his leg and kicked Jiang Hui, who was still in shock, more than 10 feet away. She fell to the ground with a loud bang, seemingly forgetting the pain. She widened her eyes in disbelief and stared at Li Chen'an, feeling her brain buzzing and not daring to say a word more. "I never hit women." "You're not a woman, you're a beast." "No, this insults the beast. You're better off as a beast." Li Chen'an walked over step by step, and Jiang Hui became even more aware of Li Chen'an's fierce face at this moment. She moved backwards on the ground, and the red silk scarf in her hand fell to the side. She kept begging for mercy, "No, don't come over, you. You." Li Chen'an stopped, his words sounded somewhat ambiguous, as if he wanted to do something to her. "Remember, from now on, you'll hold your tail and be your little one. If you dare to say a word loudly to me, my mother, or my sister again." His face darkened and he spat out a vicious sentence. "I really would kill you." Jiang Hui suddenly felt cold all over, as if she had already felt the invisible killing intent emanating from Li Chen'an. Just then, Jiang Hui's exclamation startled the servants in the mansion. At this moment, the 5 servants were running towards here. They saw Li Chen'an and also saw Jiang Hui sitting on the ground. In this mansion, Jiang Hui seemed to have become their lord, but now seeing the lord being humiliated, the 5 of them shouted and rushed towards Li Chen'an. If Li Chen'an had lived in his past life, he wouldn't have been afraid of these 5 people because he had practiced taekwondo, and not only did he seek help but also exercised regularly. His physical fitness was maintained quite well. But the body of his predecessor was just a gimmick. For the past 10 days, he had been thinking about some issues and didn't have time to exercise. Obviously, he wasn't a match for these 5 servants. Li Chen'an looked around and saw a hole next to the garden on the left. At this moment, Jiang Hui forgot about the pain and fear when the reinforcements arrived. She still sat on the ground and let out a heart-wrenching scream. Beat, beat, kill him, kill him. Li Chen'an turned around and ran towards the garden. He twisted his hoe, took turns with both hands, and then threw it at the evil slave who was charging at the front. He certainly did not use a hoe blade, as it could not cause human life. But with the weight of the hoe handle and the hoe head, this guy can't bear to smash it. If it were hit on the head, it would probably open the gourd, so he hit the shoulder of the evil slave. That evil slave had never paid much attention to the young master of the Li mansion before, thinking that his ferocity was enough to scare Li Chen'an to pee. So he was careless. He didn't hide. With a bang. He also let out a heart-wrenching scream. Ah! Li Chen'an never stopped because of this, because fighting is a necessary task that requires a single blow to make the opponent lose their combat effectiveness. The hoe fell to the ground, and he supported it with both hands. With the handle of the hoe as the fulcrum, he jumped up and kicked the second evil slave. The evil slave was kicked away with this kick, and Li Chen'an fell to the ground, sweeping the hoe with ease. Bang! Ah! It may seem like a long story, but in just a few breaths, Li Chen'an held a hoe like a god of war, and all 5 evil slaves fell to the ground, each one wailing incessantly. Some people have broken their legs, some have broken their arms, some have broken their shoulders, and some have swollen faces like pig heads. The blood stained the land red, and the mournful and frightened birds that returned to their nests flew up. Jiang Hui was stunned. She could never imagine how the once cowardly boy suddenly became so fierce. This is a feeling of unfamiliarity. She thought she had already mastered everything about the 3 of them, including their fate. Now she suddenly realized that she was completely wrong. So he used to pretend. It must be like this. What will he do next? Is he here for the family business of the Li family? Will he really dare to kill himself? Li Chen'an walked over to Jiang Hui with a hoe, and suddenly he grinned, a smile that seemed like a demon in Jiang Hui's eyes. Don't mess around. Li Chen'an suddenly restrained his smile, lifted the hoe on his shoulder high, and Jiang Hui's face turned pale. He let out a miserable cry, don't. Bang! Li Chen'an hoed on a nearby plum tree. Ah! Jiang Hui's legs kicked wildly, and the yellow and white object immediately flowed all over the ground. Long memory and adherence to rules are the key to living a decent life. He threw down his hoe and turned away. A person walked towards the gate. He is Li Chen'an and his father is Li Wenhan. Li Wenhan saw the tragic scene in this courtyard and also saw the back of Li Chen'an. Niezi, what have you done? End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Real Men. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Real Men. Li Wenhan was furious. Today, a wealthy scholar was invited to give a lecture at Juxia Academy. However, due to the fact that Miss Zhongli's 3rd daughter was making friends through literary exchange at Huaping Lake, all the students in the academy went to Huaping Lake. The literary style of Ningguo is extremely prosperous, and there are also numerous literary societies. The National Academy of Sciences, based on the idea that reading 10,000 books is better than traveling 10,000 miles, often advocates students to participate in large-scale cultural events in various places. Moreover, it is said that the cultural event at Huaping Lake is also related to the happiness of the third miss of Zhongli Mansion, so this matter cannot be stopped. But it fell clean. As the head of Zhuxia Academy, he accompanied Mr. Zhang Pingju, a student from Guanling City, to chat freely with Mr. Hua in the Cuizhu Garden of Zhuxia Academy. Some of the viewpoints he put forward were recognized by Hua Laoda, and his poem also received praise from Hua Laoda, which of course made Li Wenhan very excited. After all, Hua Laoda is the most knowledgeable scholar among the 7 major schools of thought in the state of Ning, and the final reviewer of 100 Poems and Prose Collection of Ning. Li Wenhan was still unsatisfied and wished he could appreciate all the poems he had worked so hard on in his daily life for the old scholar Hua. However, as the sun was setting in the west, the old scholar Hua also wanted to join the fun of Huaping Lake. So Li Wenhan could only bid farewell with regret, hoping that Hua Laoda could spend more time at Zhuxia Academy. However, he benefited a lot today, especially from the encouragement from the old scholar Hua. He felt relieved and felt that he had finally met someone he appreciated, and the future was promising. On the way back, Li Wenhan poured a pound of wine and bought a braised chicken. I thought about having a good drink tonight, and having a good time with my concubine Jiang Hui to have another son for myself. However, when I returned home, I saw this scene. The originally beautiful mood was instantly torn apart by everything in front of me. He was naturally angry from the bottom of his heart and almost smashed the wine jug in his hand at Li Chen'an. Jiang Hui, who was sitting on the ground and scared out of her wits, seemed to have found her backbone when she saw her master return. Ignoring the stench on her body, she climbed up from the ground and was about to accuse her. Unexpectedly, Li Chen'an took back the foot that had stepped into the moonlight door, turned around, and glared at her. Just that one glance. Jiang Hui was immediately aroused, and the words on her lips were suppressed. Li Chen'an looked at Li Wenhan. With a frown on his brow and a cold gaze, he said seriously to Li Wenhan. "Can't you see what I've done?" He took a step forward and said, "You came back just in time. I really want to ask you." He took another step forward, only 3 steps away from Li Wenhan. At this moment, Li Wenhan was shocked and suddenly felt that his eldest son was very unfamiliar. What he saw in Li Chen'an's eyes was coldness and an irresistible force, so he unconsciously took a step back. As a teacher, do you know that you should not forget your poor and humble friends, and that a wife who is worthless will not leave the court? Li Chen'an took another step forward, aggressive. Do you know the difference between seniority, order, and hierarchy? Do you know that your original wife is seriously ill? Not only did you not serve your mistress, but you also refused to pay for medical treatment, soup, and medicine. She wants my mother's life. Her crime should be punished. Li Wenhan took another step back. Of course, he knew his first wife was seriously ill, but he had already distanced himself from her over the years and felt that this matter was not important. If his wife really died of illness, he even planned to help his concubine become a legitimate official. After all, his second son Li Chen'an already had a scholar status and could take the imperial examination or even become a high school jinshi in the future. The 3-door lintel of the Li family can be widened, making him proud in front of his 2 brothers. Li Chen'an pressed forward step by step, with an angry expression, and then said, "Not only did you not punish her, but you also allowed her to act recklessly. What have you done to cultivate oneself, unify the family, govern the country, and pacify the world? What can you do? You can't do anything except curse your son and hate your wife. As a father and a husband, I feel ashamed for you." Li Wenhan took 3 steps back. Li Chen'an's heart was filled with remorse, and he was no longer at ease. Li Qiaoshi, who was startled by the noise outside and ran out, was stunned at the moment. Kaiyang, who was lying on the wall of Li Mansion investigating Li Chen'an, was already stunned. Li Wenhan couldn't believe that these words were spoken by his dull and foolish son. These words struck his heart like a heavy hammer, leaving his mind blank for a moment. Li Xiaoxi was completely unable to match her current brother with her previous brother, and she felt the stagnant aura in her heart suddenly dissipate. After being frightened, her heart was filled with joy, completely oblivious to the sweat in her tight grip on the hem of her hand. She looked at her brother's back standing as loose as a pine tree, and a smile appeared on her face. "This is my brother, this is the courage that a man should have." Just. Why did he suddenly become so powerful? Li Chen'an stood a step in front of Li Wenhan, who retreated to the fence in the garden. He had no choice but to retreat. Li Chen'an leaned over and looked at Li Wenhan's flushed face, then said another sentence. "You, in vain as a husband and also in vain as a father." He stood straight again, standing straight like a javelin. He didn't say anything, turned around and walked towards the moonlit door. Li Wenhan's old face turned red and white for a moment. He looked at his straight back, his mouth promised, but he didn't utter a word. Jiang Huizhan, who was covered in a foul odor, walked over cautiously and said, "Master, do you want to be my concubine? Get lost." Pop. Li Wenhan shook his hand and slapped Jiang Hui. Jiang Hui widened her eyes and covered her face, looking at her husband in disbelief. At this moment, Li Wenhan still looked at the figure gradually disappearing behind the moonlight door. After a moment, he twisted his wine and braised chicken and walked towards the west courtyard. His back was arched, and even his steps were a bit unsteady, as if he had suddenly aged 10 years. Jiang Hui closed her mouth and gritted her teeth, her eyes emitting a vicious light. She thought to herself that my son Li Chen'an would go to Huaping Lake to attend a cultural gathering today. If my son were to win the championship and become the uncle of Zhongli Mansion, I insist that you, Li Chen, be better off dead than alive. Kaiyang, who was still lying on the wall, grinned and flew away. Are all the people in Guangling City blind? Who said Li Chen'an is cowardly and unbearable? Who says Li Chen'an is a fool? What just happened was simply too violent. Is the words he scolded his father just now something that a fool can say? Shen Qianshan, the member of the Shen family, actually wants to divorce and even claims that he is the shrewd businessman in Guangling City. I'm afraid he'll blind his dog this time. It was the fourth Royal Highness Princess who had a good eye and had seen the difference between Li Chen'an and Li Chen'an. This kid needs to be recommended to Royal Highness Princess. Li Jingxi needs such talents. When Li Chen'an was training his father in the Li Mansion, Zhong Liruoshui was absent-mindedly waiting for the talented scholars to write poetry on the painted boat at Huaping Lake. She didn't have a proposition, so the difficulty was lowered by many levels. Because poetry can be stored in the mind, it can come in handy at this time. However, those students pretended one by one, as if trying to show her that they were acting on the spot. Perhaps because that word had already occupied her mind, she couldn't show any interest in the 26 most talented talents selected from the initial selection on the third floor. The girl lazily lay on the desk, with her small face on her side, and happened to see the picturesque lake outside the window under the sunset. But her gaze did not focus, and after a moment, a smile appeared on her face. His couplet is really good, but a bed wide with nothing in mind also indicates that the person has no great ambitions. Of course, it can also be described as indifferent to fame and fortune, but the fourth princess said that he is only 17 or 18 years old, and such an age seems to have nothing to do with indifferent fame and fortune. So is he really lacking ambition? It shouldn't have been like this before. Because his poem is so unforgettable. He was hurt by emotions, so his heart became tired. Therefore, he looked down on fame and fortune, and all he wanted was a bed and peace of mind. Poetry comes from the heart, and based solely on this one poem, it cannot be determined that he is a person with no ambitions. It would be great if he could obtain the 9 poems he wrote again. With this thought in mind, the girl couldn't sit still anymore, so she got up and walked towards the room at the stern of the boat. Princess Ning Chu is in that room. The bamboo curtain hanging on the window of the room is half rolled up. The sunset entered the window, reflecting Ning Chu's delicate and charming face. Shen Qiaodai sat opposite Ning Chu, unaware that Ning Chu was her daughter. She was a bit cramped and shy, with her head slightly hooked. Although she was brewing a pot of tea, her mind was clearly not focused on it. Because the man across from me is really too handsome. Not only handsome, but also the aura emanating from this man's body is what attracts Shen Qiaodai the most. That was a familiar temperament of Shen Qiaodai, which she had experienced on Zhongli Qiuyang, the older brother of Zhongli Ruoshui, but obviously the temperament emanating from the young master in front of her was even stronger. So, he must be a son of a wealthy family from Kyoto. Their family's status may be even more transcendent than that of Zhongli Mansion. What kind of existence is that? Shen Qiaodai dare not imagine. She harbored a desire to make friends, but the young master seemed to have no intention of conversing, which made her somewhat frustrated. As a result, she remembered her fiancé. She suddenly sneered to herself, how could her fiancé compare to this wealthy young master? It's like fireflies to the bright moon. The water is boiling. Why are you laughing? Zhongli Ruoshui happened to come in, and Shen Qiaodai was startled, only to realize that she had lost her composure. She took a handful of tea and put it into the teapot. She reached out to stroke the strands of messy hair that had been blown away by the evening breeze and said awkwardly, "It's not my hard work yet. Didn't you get divorced?" Shen Qiaodai sat on the side and asked curiously. Shen Qiaodai shook her head and sighed, where would the Li family agree to divorce? Although he has been kicked out by the Li family now, he is still the seed of the Li family. If he agrees to my family's divorce, he may not find a wife in his lifetime. But he is so incompetent, isn't it that marrying him means you will never have happiness again in this lifetime? No way. It is the character of the third miss of Zhongli Mansion to pull out her sword and help when she sees injustice on the road. With her small fist, she hammered the table and said, "I'll make the decision for you. If I can't make the decision, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead." Zhongli Ruoshui roared at Ning Chu, who turned around and said lightly, "Don't worry, I'll send someone to catch his father tomorrow. Isn't it just a marriage contract? I want his father to tear it up in front of you, how about it?" Shen Qiaodai was immediately overjoyed. She quickly poured 2 cups of tea and handed them over, saying, "Thank you very much, young lady, for your success." End of this chapter. Who is he in Chapter 8? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Who is he in Chapter 8? Who is he in Chapter 8? As the last rays of the sunset recede from the Huaping Lake, the shore is still surrounded by people. They are all students and literati who were eliminated in the first round of couplets. They stood in the cool night breeze, eagerly anticipating the news from the painted boat one by one. At this moment, the fans in their hands were all put away, and even their little eyes did not take a glance at any clever girl. After all, we have already lost. Literati value face, what they need now is to conceal their embarrassment, rather than exposing their failures again. But there needs to be some talk, which makes it more calm. Who do you think can become the leader of this cultural conference? What more suspense can there be? When it arises among the 3 great talents in Guanling City. All 3 of them have climbed up to the 3rd floor of the painting boat. Not necessarily, don't you know that 2 of those 4 people from Kyoto have come? Brother, you're talking about 2 of the 4 great talents from Kyoto. Which 2 are they? Hua Manting, Hua Lauda, and Guanling City scholar Zhang Pingjiu were pushing hard towards the painting boat in the crowd, and the voices of these students were heard discussing. One of them is Su Muxin, the leader of the 4 great talents in Kyoto, and the second is Qi Zhixue, a talented young man from the Qi family in Kyoto. Qi Dasho from the Qi family has also arrived. It seems that this good thing will eventually fall on the Qi family. Isn't Qi Jishue slightly inferior to Su Muxin in poetry and lyrics? What do you know? The Duke's mansion of Qi and the Zhongli's mansion are a perfect match. As for Su Muxin, he is indeed knowledgeable, but after all, he comes from a humble family. Although Zhongli Mansion is not one of the 5 great powers' mansions, its heritage and the imperial favor it receives are not inferior to those of the 5 great powers' mansions. This kind of high-ranking aristocrat emphasizes the alliance of strong and powerful, in order for their respective families to rise to higher levels. Are you still lucky enough to think that this literary society's son-in-law selection will really emerge from you, these humble officials? The young man and old god opened the fan with a swipe in his presence, revealing a sophisticated demeanor. This is all for you people to see. What kind of woman is the 3rd Miss of Zhongli Mansion? She must be the young master of Qi from the Duke of Qi. Everyone showed a sudden realization. One by one, they immediately let go of the knot of failure, whispering that it was not because of any flaws in their own couplet, but because this matter was originally predetermined. No wonder I lost. The people on the painted boat are also accompanying and running. They are all accompanying in a play. But still no one left, as if hoping for the final result to prove that they were not defeated due to poor skills. The painted boat is 3 floors above. Li Chen'an picked up his pen and dropped it onto the paper. After a moment, he wrote a poem. He carefully read the poem again and felt very happy, feeling that it was the best poem he had ever written in his life. If I could win the title of today's literary champion with this poem and become the son-in-law of Zhongli's family, I would be able to soar to the sky and become a rising star of the younger generation in the future. If the 3rd young lady of Zhongli Mansion marries the Li family in Guangling, the lintel of the Li family will be no less impressive than the 2 houses in Yujing City, and even taller. My father must be delighted. If he goes to the capital city in the future, he would dare to knock on the dense door of my uncle's house with his head held high and his chest held high. Mother will become the main wife of the Li family, and now the main wife. She should also move out of the East Yard. Li Chen'an looked up, but did not see the shadow of Miss Zhongli. He felt a bit regretful, and after thinking for a moment, he was still the first to take this piece of paper to the front desk. He handed this poem to 3 senior scholars and returned to his seat, looking out at the people standing by the picturesque lake with a cold smile. A bunch of scumbags. Do toads also want to eat swan meat? I simply don't know the vastness of heaven and earth. Sitting in front of the window, Su Muxin had already written the words he had written. He looked up at Qi Jishue on the side, and the 2 of them smiled at each other. There seemed to be countless sparks flickering at the intersection of their eyes. They stood up and all brought their poems to the front desk. After a moment, the other students no longer held their composure and began writing, before being handed over to the 3 judges. At this moment, Ning Chu in the back cabin withdrew her gaze, picked up a teacup and looked at Shen Xiaodai again. After taking a sip of tea, she still asked again. Miss Shen, although I have already released that, I will definitely be able to help you do it, but this matter is not a small matter after all. Do you want to think about it again? Shen Xiaodai, where would she think of Li Chen'an? Since she became sensible and heard about Li Chen'an's unbearable situation, this marriage has become her nightmare. Although she was born into a merchant family, her knowledge is excellent. In this city of Guangling, although her name is not as well known as Zhong Liruoshui, she is also a famous talented woman in Guangling. Besides, she is also skilled in business, especially at calculating accounts. If it weren't for that engagement, she felt like she had already found the right person. Such as Hu Shufan, one of the 3 great talents of Guangling. But because of her father's confusion, she and Hu Shufan can only fall in love with each other, but cannot make physical promises. How many flowers before and under the moon, ultimately can only leave a sigh. Her father's withdrawal filled her with anticipation, but to her surprise, Li Wenhan disregarded his face and refused to return the marriage certificate even if it was widely known throughout the city. Now that this noble person is in charge of herself, of course it is something she desires. The little girl had already figured it out. With sadness in her heart, she felt that this was her life. The Li family did not return the marriage certificate. The little girl could only accept her fate. I only think about being with Li Chen'an in the future. They are called husband and wife, but they are like strangers. The saying, raising eyebrows together and growing old together, naturally has nothing to do with me. It's like entering Buddhism. Cultivating a pure life in that bitter sea. If the young master can help the young woman escape from that bitter sea, the young woman will be grateful to the young master for her whole life. When Shen Qiaodai said these words, 2 lines of clear tears flowed down, becoming even more miserable and pitiful. The nearby Zhongli Ruoshui felt even more hateful towards the Li family. Zhongli Ruoshui, who was good at fighting against injustice, spoke with anger in his words. Why should a daughter's family be bound by their parents' engagement? Why should we marry a chicken and follow a dog? If that man is really like a chicken and a dog, wouldn't his whole life be destroyed like this? Don't worry, 4th. Young master will definitely make the decision for you. Ning Chu thought to herself that although she had no interaction with Shen Qiaodai, this woman was also one of Zhongli Ruoshui's close friends. Besides, her own marriage cannot be decided, and she certainly hopes that Shen Qiaodia's marriage will not be so tragic. So she said confidently, okay, since the girl has made this decision, I believe you have the beauty of perfection. But let's make it clear first. Once this engagement is cancelled, you can't regret it. Shen Qiaodai wouldn't regret it, she's not even happy yet. She quickly stood up and said a blessing to Ning Chu, little girl. Would rather die than regret. At this moment, a maid brought in 6 excellent poems that had been evaluated by 3 senior scholars. Miss, the 3 elders said that the leader of this literary event should have been born among these 6 poems, all between Uncle Zhong. The final decision depends on Mrs. Meaning. Zhongli Ruoshui took these 6 poems over and looked at them one by one. Not to mention that these 6 poems were indeed good, but compared to that person's poem, these poems are either too ingenious, tasteless, or tangible and lifeless. Why did Qi Zhixue and Su Muxin join in the fun? Compared to that person's poem, the 4 great talents of Kyoto still lack a third of their charm, Li Chen'an. Zhongli Ruoshui looked at Shen Qiaodai with a skeptical expression and asked, that person's name is Li Chen'an. Shen Qiaodai was also taken aback for a moment and replied, yes, I think Li Chen'an is his younger brother. Half-brother, studying at Juxia Academy, and now he is a scholar. I heard that he is very likely to pass the provincial examination this year, and he is also somewhat famous in Guangling City. Ah! Zhongli Ruoshui handed these poems to Shen Qiaodai, they all have the same father. Why is this gap so big? Isn't that right? If Li Chen'an had half the ability of his younger brother, I would also be able to accept it. Miss San, these poems are really good. You just said that compared to that person's poems, the underlying meaning of these words is still a bit lacking. At a glance, Shen Qiaodai knew that these 6 poems were truly rare. Especially the 2 poems by Su Muxin and Qi Zhixue are rare masterpieces, but Miss Zhongli disparaged them all. Isn't the poetry written by the person in her mouth the pinnacle? Zhongli Ruoshui shrugged his shoulders and said, just take a look at this song again and you'll understand. She handed the poem written by Li Chen'an to Shen Qiaodai. The characters were a bit ugly, but when Shen Qiaodai read this poem, she was immediately taken aback. Good word. No wonder Miss San said so. Who wrote this word? Zhongli Ruoshui shook his head and said, I don't know who the author of this poem is yet. At this moment, another maid walked in and said, Miss, 2 people have come outside. They said it was our Guangling City student, Zhang, who was elected by Zhang Jingzhang. Another old man said that the garden is full of flowers. Upon hearing this, Zhongli Ruoshui immediately stood up and said, quickly, "No, I will personally go and welcome you." After a moment, she welcomed the two into the cabin and invited them to take their seats. Shen Xiaodai quickly put down the paper in her hand and poured a cup of tea for them. The gaze full of flowers fell on Ning Chuchu's face. Ning Chuchu blinked his eyes and laughed heartily. "It turns out that it's Mr. Hua coming. I'll toast Mr. Hua. Which song is this singing about?" Hua Manting did not reveal Ning Chuchu's identity. "I heard about today's Huaping Lake Culture Festival, so I came to join in the fun." He took a sip of tea and turned his head to look at Zhongli Ruoshui. "Your grandfather entrusted me with something, and I will handle this literary competition for you. These." He pointed to the paper on the table and said, "Are these all poems waiting to be selected?" "Well, Grandpa Hua, please take your time. Since you are always personally reviewing, you need to paste your name. You girl, do you think that Su Mushin is my disciple and I would favor him? Kyoto knows that you love Su Mushin the most. Who knows if you have that thought in mind?" "In short, naming is for the sake of fairness," said Zhongli Ruoshui, a mischievous figure. "Okay. I also want to see how talented these students are. Let's order someone to become famous." Zhongli Ruoshui had just handed these 7 poems to a maid when Kaiyang stepped in. "Jian, young master. Did you find out? Well, who is he?" End of this chapter. Chapter 9. His name is Li Chen'an. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. His name is Li Chen'an. Who is he? Ning Chuchu asked this question. Zhongli Ruoshui looked up at Kaiyang, and even Shen Xiaodai turned her gaze to Kaiyang. Zhongli Ruoshui suddenly felt a little nervous. She really liked this poem, and of course, she also liked the couplet with a wide bed and nothing to worry about. That poem tells the pain that was hurt by emotions in his heart. In Zhongli Ruoshui's eyes, since there is that sadness in his heart, how can he have nothing in his heart? If there must be a reason, it is that the boy has already read through the word love. He has gone through that emotional trauma and now has transformed, so his vision and heart have become broader. Only in this way can he achieve that bed width. So, even if he uses the name of the third miss of Zhongli Mansion to recruit a son-in-law through literature, he doesn't care at all. Perhaps this is because he is not indifferent and has no clear aspirations. If he is truly peaceful, perhaps he can truly achieve great things. So the most crucial thing now is whether that person's background is innocent. If he is innocent, then in 3 or 5 days, he will go to the place where he lives and have a glass of wine he brewed. Although brewing is a small path, literati are good at it. He can be both drunk and extremely cultured. Perhaps one can still witness his drunken essay with their own eyes, which is the true manifestation of his talent. As for Ning Chuchu and Shen Xiaodai, they didn't think so much, they were just curious. Ning Chuchu accidentally met a young man who had such great talent. He didn't even know Li Jingxi, so of course she was curious about his background. And Shen Xiaodai had just read that poem, and her mind had gone through all the famous talents in Guangling City. She thought to herself that only the 3 most famous talents in Guangling could possibly write this poem, but she didn't know which one it was. "I hope he is Huishu Fan." Kaiyang bowed and said, "Young master, his name is Li Chen'an." Ning Chuchu opened her small mouth in shock and glanced at the equally shocked Zhongli Ruoshui, then at the unbelievable Shen Xiaodai beside her. She asked again, "Which Li Chen'an?" "Hui Gongzi, he is the Li Chen'an from the Li family, who is a 7th Jinshi and a father-son 3rd scout." Looking at the master's widened eyes, Kaiyang said again, "I have found it clear that Li Chen'an has gone to the 3rd room of the Li family. His father, Li Wenhan, is now the principal of Zhuxia Academy. This person's reputation in Guangling City was not very good. It is said that he was a bit foolish, so he couldn't become a martial artist. Therefore, he went into business and opened a snack shop in Erjingu Alley. Later, he became obsessed with gambling. The snack shop went bankrupt, and his father Li Wenhan used 100 taels of silver to pay off his debt before being expelled from the house. Half a month ago, the Shen family in Guangling City was the largest grain merchant in Guangling, Shen Qianshan, who went to the Li mansion to withdraw his marriage. It was said that this marriage was a child marriage arranged more than 10 years ago, but Li Wenhan did not agree. Today, he still has an engagement with the eldest daughter of the Shen family, Shen Xiaodai. It's just that what I saw with my own eyes is slightly different from some of the rumors. When Kaiyang finished speaking, all three women were stunned. Wait. Zhong Liruoshui interrupted Kaiyang's words, are you sure he really is that Li Chen'an? Miss Hui-san, it's true that he is Li Chen'an. At this moment, Hua Laoda and Zhang Pingju, who were reading those poems, also turned their heads. Hua Laoda stroked his long beard and asked with a puzzled expression, Li Wenhan's eldest son. That's not right. Today, we were at Zhuxia Academy, and Li Wenhan even mentioned his eldest son, saying that his family is unfortunate, his eldest son is foolish, and it is difficult to inherit the Li family's business. How did you suddenly become interested in Li Chen'an? Grandpa Hua, one of these 7 poems is written by Li Chen'an, perhaps. It may surprise you a bit. Zhang Pingju was also taken aback. Of course, he also knew about Li Wenhan's eldest son. He frowned and said, that child. If his heart is not bad, but if he wrote a poem that can be placed on this desk, I will never believe it. That child was enlightened at the age of 3, his father personally enlightened him, his father personally taught him, until the age of 9. He really can't memorize the 3-character classic. I have been to the Li mansion multiple times on business, and have also seen that child many times. Perhaps Li Wenhan's desire for his son to become a successful man was too urgent, and his demands on that child were even more strict, which led to the child's cowardice in nature. Seeing people bowing, greeting like mosquitoes and flies, even trembling with their bodies hooked up on the road. As for the way of poetry, he has never even seen the door. If he could speak fluently, even if it was not in the right tone, Li Wenhan probably wouldn't be so desperate. It is well known that there is no shortcut to the path of literature. While talent is important, it still needs to be built on the accumulation of time. So. I can't believe it. Kaiyang suddenly became unhappy. This old man was questioning her profession. This old man, but I have heard and seen everything with my own ears and eyes. He lives in a shop under the big banyan tree at the east end of Erjingu Alley. Today, he went to the West Market, bought a lot of things, and then met his sister Li Qiaoxi. Does he have a sister named Li Qiaoxi? Zhang Pingju nodded and said, he does have a biological sister named Li Qiaoxi. That's right. Kaiyang bowed and said, his mother is seriously ill. Li Qiaoxi originally intended to hire Dr. Zhang from the revival hall, but he didn't have any money in his pocket. However, Li Chen'an had more than 60 taels of silver in his pocket. He spent more than 60 taels in the West Market, and when he went down to investigate, he found that it was the bank account of the 8 Blessings Bank in Kyoto, which perfectly matched the one given to him by Ziyuan. Afterwards, Li Chen'an and his siblings went to the Spring Festival Hall and invited Dr. Zhang back to the Li Mansion, where Kaiyang paused for a moment, with a flicker of light in his eyes. He was indeed kicked out of the house, so Li Wenhan's concubine blocked his way. As a result, if his character is truly cowardly and unbearable, and if rumors are true, he will definitely leave the Li Mansion in a disheveled manner. However, he did not only did he not, but he also beat up that little concubine. Zhong Liruoshui's eyes widened, his small mouth narrowed slightly, and he swallowed a mouthful of saliva before nervously asking, and then what? Then the evil slaves of the Li family came out, 5 of whom were servants of the Li family, all obedient to the mistress. The 5 of them rushed towards Li Chen'an like dogs. Ah! Zhong Liruoshui let out a cry of surprise, and his little hand immediately covered his mouth with worry in his eyes. I heard that although he has been practicing martial arts with boxer Zheng Haoyang for 3 years, he still has no strength to bind his hands. Isn't this a big loss? Kaiyang smiled slightly and shook his head. Miss San is too worried. I dare say that everyone in Guanling City has taken a glance. Could he still be able to fully recover? He didn't retreat. He took a hoe from the garden and was as fierce as a tiger descending the mountain. He threw all 5 evil slaves to the ground. Has he been injured? Zhong Liruoshui didn't realize that she was extremely concerned about Li Chen'an's safety at the moment, nor did she see Shen Xiaojie's face turning red and white on the side. He was not injured. Did anyone die there? No, he acted with great discretion, but those 5 people were all disabled. That's good, Zhong Liruoshui patted the bulging chest and nervously asked, and then what? Then his father came back. Oh, his father didn't like him, didn't he want to punish him? It should have been like this. When his father was admitted to the hospital, he saw the blood in that place and heard the mournful cries of that hospital. He was furious on the spot and scolded, "Son of a bitch, what have you done?" Kaiyang danced and took a step with his hands on his back, following the example of Li Chen'an. He wasn't afraid, and I didn't see him trembling and timid either. What I saw was his majestic and standing like a pine tree. Zhong Liruoshui took another sip of cold air. Did he hit his father? There was no such thing, but he had a good scolding for his father, leaving him speechless. What did he say? He said, "As a teacher, do you know that you should not forget your poor and humble friends, and that a wife with a scum will not leave the court? Do you know the difference between seniority, order, and hierarchy? Do you know that your original wife is seriously ill? Not only did you not serve your mistress, but you also refused to pay for medical treatment, soup, and medicine. She wants my mother's life. Her crime should be punished. Not only did you not punish her, but you also allowed her to act recklessly. What have you done to cultivate oneself, unify the family, govern the country, and pacify the world? What can you do? You can't do anything except curse your son and hate your wife. As a father and a husband, I feel ashamed for you." Kaiyang imitated the tone of Li Chen'an at that time, which was very heroic, as if it was a storm. Finally, he said, "You are in vain as a husband and a father." Then he turned around and went to the east courtyard, and his subordinates returned here. Suddenly fell into silence. Hua Lao Daru had no understanding of Li Chen'an, but he felt that if Li Chen'an were truly foolish and cowardly, he would not have such an imposing demeanor and could not speak such words at all. Zhang Pingju knew about some of the troubles in Li Wenhan's family, and he felt a bit dizzy. For a moment, he couldn't believe that the cowardly Li Chen'an he had seen with his own eyes would still have such a tough side. Shen Xiaodai had already confirmed that he was Li Chen'an, but she was puzzled by why his contrast was so great. Ning Chu frowned slightly, wondering why this person had undergone such a huge change. Only Zhongli, like water for a moment, clapped his hands and cheered, "Okay. Good fight. Good scolding." Ning Chu glared at her and said, "That's his father. Can his father not be rational?" Zhong Liruoshui's slender neck raised, his eyebrows fluttering, and he said, "Tell reason to those who understand reason, show strength to those who are rude, understand propriety, know advance and retreat, and not be cliché, only then can he be a good man with blood." Suddenly, Zhong Liruoshui thought of something. She turned her head to look at Shen Xiaodai and chuckled. "But as promised, if you want to break free from the sea of suffering, this engagement must be cancelled." After saying this, Zhong Liruoshui sat up straight and added with utmost seriousness, "You can't go back on your word. Please have Grandpa Hua and Mr. Zhang take a look at those poems again." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Butterfly Loves Flowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Butterfly loves flowers. Hua Manting stroked her long beard and smiled slightly, looking very seriously at those poems. Although he didn't know the cause, he now understood their words clearly in his heart. This time I came to Guangling City to give a lecture. I was actually entrusted by her grandfather Zhongli Ruoshui, Zhongli Pa. Zhongli Bao was worried that his beloved granddaughter had done an outrageous and astonishing act, so he asked Hua Manting to come to Guangling City. Since the granddaughter intends to choose a son. In law through literature, she must find the most talented young man in Ningguo. Therefore, Zhongli broke the news in the small circle of the capital city of Kyoto. So 2 of the 4 talented scholars from Yujing City also went to Guangling. Both of them, Zhongli Bao, were well aware that although Su Muxin came from a humble family, he was the favorite student of Hua Laoda, and his future was definitely limitless. And the other Qi Zhixue, who was originally the eldest young master of the Duke of Qi, was also quite low-key in his daily behavior, with excellent character and cultivation, and was also the best candidate for his granddaughter. In Zhong Libo's view, the son. In law chosen by the granddaughter was basically born among these 2 young men, because there were no illustrious scholars under their fame. In terms of poetry and articles, the talented scholars in Guangling City were still slightly inferior to these 2. He was worried that the judgment his granddaughter sought would be unfair, so he invited Hua Laoda to come to Guangling to personally inspect it. And the ancient and supernatural Zhong Liruoshui seemed to have guessed his purpose and was also worried about his favoritism and fraud, so he adopted the method of name confusion. In fact, he is familiar with Su Muxin's words, but he really won't be biased. What he wants to know more at this moment is which word was written by Li Chen'an, a young man who couldn't even memorize the 3-character classic suddenly wrote a poem that stood out, which was truly unbelievable to him. It quieted down again here. Apart from the flowers filling the courtyard, even Zhang Pingjiu was digesting what Kaiyang had just said. That statement overturned their understanding of that Li Chen'an, causing them to feel a bit confused for a moment, still unable to connect the former Li Chen'an with what Kaiyang is talking about now. Especially Shen Xiaodai. I just asked the nobleman to help retrieve the marriage certificate before, but I didn't expect Kaiyang to say that the poem was written by Li Chen'an. For Li Chen'an, she truly knows the root and the bottom. If Li Chen'an doesn't know a few big characters, it's a bit excessive, but he's really stupid. In these 17 years, he hasn't even composed a limerick poem. How could he suddenly come up with such a good word? Shen Xiaodia's eyes lit up and she looked up at Zhong Liruoshui. Miss San, could you say? Could that poem have been plagiarized by him from somewhere? Zhong Liruoshui was taken aback and asked in confusion, do you mean that he really can't write such poetry? I can guarantee that he really has no ink on his chest, otherwise he wouldn't have been kicked out of the house by his father. Ning Chuchu also calmed down at this moment. Shen Xiaodai is a shrewd woman. If Li Chen'an really has such great talent, she may be eager to enter the Li family's door earlier. But she is really eager to withdraw. So the Li Chen'an investigated by Kaiyang is very different from the former Li Chen'an, they are completely different, but this matter is already simple, and Kaiyang cannot make a mistake. There may be some misunderstanding in between. If we have to have an explanation, you say, could he have been hiding his foolishness before? Ning Qiaoshi pondered for a moment and shook her head. It may be possible to hide it for a while, but it's almost impossible to hide it for more than 10 years. Besides, what's the point of his clumsiness? If he had shown his talent earlier, his mother's life in the mansion wouldn't have been as difficult as it is now. If he really had that talent, he had already gone to obtain official positions. Why should he be buried by the people of Guangling City every day? That's right. Ning Chuchu sat up straight and looked at Kaiyang. You go and investigate carefully. Yuhan will also follow him and see if he has any amazing moves. The 2 guards bowed and retreated, Ning Chuchu looking at Zhong Liruoshui. If something goes wrong, there must be a demon. Before this matter is thoroughly investigated, you must not have any emotions towards him. Zhong Liruoshui nodded, after all, it was the biggest thing in her life. After all, Li Chen'an had too many conflicts before and after, and she did need further understanding, such as, didn't Ziyuan and Yuheng say he wrote about 10 poems in one go? Why don't we go take a look? If Li Chen'an really wrote 10 poems, and if those words all have a certain level of proficiency, it at least indicates that Li Chen'an really has talent and learning. As for the changes, we need to delve deeper into them. Shen Qiaodai was taken aback and said, "What? He wrote 10 poems in one go. It's impossible. He definitely doesn't have that ability, I dare to guarantee it with his head." Zhongli curled her lips and said, "You don't need to guarantee it with your head, I think." She took a piece of horseshoe cake and stuffed it into her mouth. After chewing for a moment, she stretched her neck and swallowed it. She picked up a teacup and looked up at Shen Qiaodai, saying, "Is there any movement in your engagement now?" "No." Shen Qiaodai's expression was firm. "I have made up my mind and only hope that the young master can help me retrieve the marriage certificate. As for why Li Chen'an has undergone such a huge change, this has nothing to do with me, and I will never regret it." Shen Qiaodai would not be confused by Li Chen'an's sudden change. Because she firmly believes that Li Chen'an is still the worthless Li Chen'an, and she also believes that Li Chen'an's poem was plagiarized, and it is highly likely that it was written by his father. Its purpose is not to cheat marriage at the entrance of Zhongli mansion, perhaps to reverse his image and make his reputation better in Guanling city. In this way, if my father sees hope, he may not force a withdrawal. It must be like this. Zhongli eyebrows and eyes curved as she thought that Li Chen'an could break away from Shen Qiaodai. In this way, Li Chen'an would be a free person. If he really had talent, he might even become his good match. If he has no talent, Zhongli twisted another piece of cake, and he and himself were still not on the same path. There is no loss, but having a frontline advantage is certainly the best outcome. Just as the two of them had their own ulterior motives in mind, the old scholar Hua Man-ting beside them suddenly slapped the desk and made a loud "pa" sound. "Good word. Good words." He raised the piece of paper in his hand, looking quite excited. Suddenly, he stood up and took 2 steps in the cabin. "The level of this word is not lower than that of me. This statement is somewhat frightening." Everyone's gaze immediately turned to the flower-filled courtyard. There are countless words expressing emotions through scenery, but precisely because there are too many, it is difficult to stand out. But this word is eye-catching, and when you read it carefully, you don't realize the past of the gods. The common way of writing is to use words to evoke people, but the beauty of this poem lies in its close connection with the sorrow of spring, yet it still refuses to express itself. Some information was revealed between the lines, winding and secluded, until the final finishing touch brought the truth to light. The flowers filled the courtyard, stroking their long beards with a lively expression. Set off the lonely spring sorrow with the beautiful scenery, the poet vividly portrays the uncomplained and regretful longing. This word should be the crown of these 7 poems. This word can be selected to be included in the collection of Ning poetry in 100 poems in the abyss, ranking in the top 20. Everyone is shocked again. Because 100 poems of Ning is a great poem of Ning, everlasting longing for each other, cherishing plum blossom, by Hua Man-ting in Hua De Ru is ranked 36th. He actually said that this word can rank in the top 20. Isn't it true that this word has surpassed his level? Grandpa Hua, which word is it? Zhongli forgot to eat the pastry, so she stood up with 1 bone and 1 bone, her beautiful eyes shining brightly. There was a hint of anticipation in her heart, but she was also worried that she might have looked away. "Well, it's that song, Butterfly Loves Flower, but I don't know which boy wrote it." Zhongli immediately burst into laughter. She walked briskly over and took the paper from the hand of the old scholar Hua. She waved it to Ning Chu and said, "Your luck is really good. If you meet any man, you have such high talent. Is it really him?" This is what Shen Xiaodai asked. She has already read this word, but now she just can't believe it. Of course. At this moment, Ning Chu reminded her, are you planning to announce that Li Chen'an is the leader of this cultural conference? The meaning of this is that Li Chen'an's reputation in Guangling City is terrible, and those students must not believe it. Unless Li Chen'an can come in person and make convincing poems on the spot, you cannot explain it. Even if those students are afraid of the reputation of Zhongli Mansion and accept it like this, if this matter spreads, people around the world will think that Li Chen'an is about to become the uncle of Zhongli Mansion. However, if the investigation results show that this poem was not written by Li Chen'an, Zhongli Mansion may become a joke in the eyes of the world. The delicately thoughtful Zhong Liruoshui instantly understood the meaning of Ning Chu. She rolled her eyes and said, I know. The old scholar beside him was stunned as he listened and recognized the scent. Is this really done by Li Chen'an, the son of Li Wenhan? Zhong Liruoshui smiled and said, but we need to further understand Li Chen'an, so please keep it a secret for Grandpa Hua and Mr. Zhang. I have to go out and announce this. Please wait a moment. We'll go eat together and have a raw meal later. Zhong Liruoshui put on her veil and walked out. She stood at the front desk, and at this moment, 100 young people gathered on the third floor whispering to each other looked at her. They knew it was the moment when the leader was revealed. Who will this leader fall on? It is highly likely that Su Muxin and Qi Zhixue. Of course, among the three great talents of Guangling City, Wen Huan and Xu Yang are also possible. Li Chen'an was also extremely nervous at the moment, only then did he know that so many talented people had come to the literary conference. He eagerly looked at the charming Zhongli on the stage, praying in his heart that a wisp of green smoke could emerge from his ancestral tomb. Thank you all for your participation, young lady. After 2 rounds of competition, the winner has now been determined. I declare. The hearts of the teenagers suddenly rose to their throats, even Su Muxin and Qi Zhixue, who had always been calm and conceited, were no exception. And Li Chen'an is even more unbearable. He even clenched his fist, held his breath, unaware that his whole body was trembling slightly. End of this chapter.